This is the first book club that we're actually able to use the new opening from the beginning to the end of the serial. And welcome back, everybody. It's October 2023. It's me, Frank, and I'm going to reintroduce you to a good friend, good buddy, and this is the second book now we get to do together. It is Jay Dyer. What's going on, Jay? Hold on, you're still muted.
What's up, dude? Good to be here.
There he is.
Thank you. My
gosh. So, last time we were together, we had, I don't know, some pretty down subject matter. We went into Brave New World to a depth that I've never done before, and it was eye-opening. It was a little bit heartbreaking, and it left you a little bit empty inside, but very necessary reading. This one is going to be a little bit more action-packed. It's going to be a little bit more spicy. We've got Mario Puzo's The Godfather, and general thoughts? What do you think so far of the first 88 pages?
Well, I did was the first 4 chapters. For me, that came out to almost 100. Okay. So was the first 4, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, then we probably have a different copy that I have then.
Yeah, different editions.
Yeah, so I'm sure we've all seen the movies. It was a lot more depth than I expected in the sense of symbolism. The films don't have a lot of symbolism per se. They're very complex stories, and they get into a lot of real geopolitical and conspiracy events, but they're not really that symbolic. There's not a lot of depth in that sense. A lot of human psychology and depth in that regard. A lot of power plays and chessboard type machinations. Depth in that sense, but the book, I was just surprised at how much symbolism is there, which I'll get into with Don Corleone and his relationship to God and him being like God, him hearing confessions. He's much like an alternate version of a priest, and so there's a lot of death symbolism that comes into it. Names have significances, so that was a surprise, but I'm definitely enjoying the book. And appreciating the movie, at least part 1, more because so much translated well into the movies. A lot of times the movies don't adapt books this long very well.
Oh yes.
But, Godfather 1 and 2 adapted very well.
Well, this is, and I've read so much about the making of the movie that I couldn't wait to read the book because I've read so much about the writing of the book. Mario Puzo's, first of all, a pulp fiction writer. You can tell from this. I mean, it is just it's just the action, it's sex, it's everything. It's right in your face, and the action never ceases. Even when we're talking about conversation, it is enthralling conversation. As you said there, I mean, even the quieter moments are really profound. Like when Don Corleone is with his sons to go visit Janko Abondando. That moment where he's seeing him through to death. That it's a quieter moment of the first 100 or 88 pages, but it's still very, very profound. And you can also, like you said there too, the political machinations. You can see why Machiavelli is very important to a lot of people in organized crime, especially when they were inside a prison. They didn't have a lot of time to do anything else but read. Machiavelli was a very, very big part of their reading materials there. So yeah. I'm just going to give you my notes. Stop along the way, jump in wherever you want, and once we get the skeletal structure down, we'll just jump into the thread like we usually do. It starts off with 3 people who need favors. You got Americo Bonacera, who suffers the indignity of being in an American courtroom and having 2 savage beasts who beat his daughter to a pulp walk free with a suspended sentence. He doesn't know where to go to. Johnny Fontaine, who has turned into a spineless slave to Vice in Hollywood, and Nazarene, the baker, who wants to have one of his associates, Enzo, made into a citizen so he's not repatriated back to Italy and he can marry his daughter. All this is set up in that wonderful wedding scene for Connie Corleone, where Don Vito, the head of the preeminent New York families, or the preeminent New York family, he's compelled by Sicilian tradition to not refuse requests on from friends on his daughter's wedding day, and that's where we're set up. And this is why the wedding scene in the movie was taken to such a degree of authenticity. The people they brought in, Puzo was a very big part of the screenwriting, the screenplay there too, so that's why it translated so well. But just right there, the setup right there, anything that you want to add to that, Jay?
I think a lot of this was pretty accurate in the sense of how things in this time period of the 40s and 50s went down. There's a great book that I don't even remember who somebody recommended to me, and it's by John Davis, and it's called Mafia Dynasty. And I'm a good ways into that book. There's entire chapters on Sammy the Bull and John Gotti. It's really a history of not just the mafia, but later on in the book, it focuses on the Gambinos. And I think what we're going to notice in the novel is that various key characters are a combination of real characters. So, I read several articles and literary theorists and historians talking about the novel, and I'm not saying every one of these, Amerigo or this other guy. I think Johnny Fontaine is somebody famous. We'll get to him in a minute, but. Yeah. They're basically, in the case of the Don, I think you're going to get somebody like Carlo Gambino. A lot of what we get in the Don's background.
Castellano.
Corleone, it matches up to a lot of Carlo and his background, and others as well. You could say Vito Genovese plays a role in some of these. So there's sort of a conglomerate. And we'll see, I think Lucky Luciano, some of that plays into Michael. Not exactly, but so the real world is really just being combined into fictional characters. But I would say what we see here is pretty accurate. He's realizing that he can't get justice in the normal. They're all realizing that as immigrants, they're limited in terms of what they feel they can get in terms of normal court justice. So now they're having to go back to their roots, which is the very thing that America is kind of getting them, and Americanism is getting them to question. What's your allegiance to? And allegiance and Americanism are a huge theme throughout this novel. And it's quite a critique, quite a commentary, because Don Vito Corleone represents the old ways, the old family, the tradition, the homeland. And then the new generations are typically trying to grapple with maintaining those traditions and that heritage, yet adapting to the new challenges and the new realities, and at times maybe even leaving this life. Right early on, Michael doesn't want any part of this. So a lot of profound historical and political tensions set up at the very beginning of the novel.
Yeah, it isn't until page 25 that we have Bonacera's meeting with Don Vito, and that is where we have that line that actually opens up the movie. That Coppola said, "This has got to open up the movie right here. I believe in America," and it made this. I made this into a theme of a broadcast that I did earlier on in this year when I asked the question, "Are we all Bonacera?" Here's a man who believed in the American dream. He invested in it. He built his family and his fortune here. And then when he needed help the most, he saw that he was low man on the totem pole. And I think that we can all relate to that these days. Only the question is for us, who is our Don Vito? That's the burning question. At least he had somewhere to go to, an alternate. And yeah, it starts taking on that very godlike material there. So. It sends up this wonderful scene at the wedding where you get to really get introduced to almost every major character. Sonny, he's all fire and fury. Fredo, the thing with Fredo in the book is he's capable in this book. He's a capable man. He's meek. He's softer than the rest of them, but he isn't a totally bumbling idiot. Where they add that kind of vulnerability with John Cazale in the movie there. And then you have Michael, who's cold, calculating, a little bit on the outside. And the thing I think is really incredible is that together, Jay, all three of them make one complete Don Vito. I mean, the three of them complete. If you put them together, that's Vito. He can be all those three things, but his sons have been broken down into three distinct qualities that you need to have balance with. So, what did you think about the introduction of those main characters?
Yeah, that's a really profound point. I didn't even think about that. You could tell right away, like we said, that Don Vito Corleone is not happy with Michael's discussed with the family. And I think a lot of times younger people, Michael has just gone off to war. He's said to be a war hero. He has a lot of courage. Now he wants to go to college and be a math professor. He doesn't want anything to do with this life. He wants to be fully an American. I mean, all the patriotism and going to war. I think in Don Vito's mind, this is Michael's way of rebelling, right? Mm-hmm. He's not having a 17-year-old, drug breakdown rebellion. He's having I'm gonna be a true American and show my dad and my family that all this silly, Sicilian, Italian homeland stuff, it's inferior to America. And that's actually a lot of people at that time felt this tension. This comes up in the Davis book and the history of the character of Carlo. Because when Carlo came over, he was, they weren't wealthy. They were not a wealthy family, but within a generation or two, a lot of these families were able to attain quite a bit of wealth. And so you had this tension again between the economy in Sicily was bad. A lot of immigrants came over to make a better life for themselves and for their family. But then as you integrate into American society, you more and more distance yourself from where you came from. And again, that tension is there because part of the purpose of the organized, crime syndicate here or the Cosa Nostra was to preserve some of these traditions. At least that's what they believed they were doing.
Yes.
And, in the discussions we had with Sammy, Sammy talks about how there's this tradition of a lot of this going back 1,000 years. And this has to do with the idea that the Sicilians thought that they were really the bearers of culture. So they were the ones that really bore high culture, not just to Italy, but to the rest of Europe. They saw the rest of Europe as sort of barbarians, and they themselves kind of the inheritors of the Roman, the classical tradition, hence that love for Machiavelli. That's actually one of the early mobsters in the first mob war. I can't remember if it's Joe the Boss or Little Caesar, but one of them was actually like that. He was obsessed with Machiavelli. He learned Latin. And so he was like, he was going to study to become a Roman Catholic priest, and then he decided he wanted to be a mobster. But he would make everybody in his crew read Machiavelli, exactly like you're saying. So again, I don't want to get too far afield, but all of this is really, super duper well done in terms of like taking historical realities and putting it into a story. And I like that right away at the wedding that we have here. And again, I might be stretching a little bit here, but I think right away we're seeing a lot of symbolism, because in Catholic theology, Orthodox theology, you have this idea that church, the celebration of the church service, is the marriage feast of the Lamb of the Book of the Apocalypse. So the liturgy, the Mass, is supposed to be the Lamb's feast. And this is kind of, I think, a parallel to that this is an altar church, so to speak. This is Don's church. This is the wedding feast, and people are coming to him and petitioning him like the judge, almost the way that Scripture talks about, when Jesus says, if a judge will grant your petition if you keep, sort of pestering him, how much more so God?
Right.
And we'll see constantly throughout the first 4 chapters that Don Corleone is pictured as a divine, patriarchal, godlike figure, if not in his own mind, to many of those who seek his patronage, seek his favors, seek his justice. So they seek him out for divine justice. And the very title of the book, I mean, yes, it's when somebody's baptized, they have a sponsor, a Godfather. Yeah, we know that. But it's also like he's God the Father.
Yes. Yes.
And I never picked up on that until getting into the book.
No, it is, and I may be wrong, but you're talking about. Were you talking about Joe Masseria?
I think it is
the boss who. I mean, that was part of that first big war there too.
Yeah, Joe the Boss and Little Caesar, and then I think you're right. Joe the Boss is the one that mastered Latin and wanted everybody to read the.
Yeah, Luciano. He worked for Joe Masseria, and then he eventually helped organize his assassination. So, that's I think that's who you're talking about. All right, yeah. This is it, and of course, there's so much symbolism. Then there's just so much. There's so much. There's a lot of fun going on here. I mean, first of all, I love the whole gatekeeper keymaster relationship between Sonny and Lucy. He's got the big pecker, she's got a big vagina, so they just kind of went together. Oh man, it's one thing to have a man's naked body described in a book. It's another thing to have a big vagina described. That's the first time for me. But still, we had on page 4, that was on page 12 or so. Page 14, Michael, you're saying it before. We're talking about the rebelliousness of going off and fighting the war. That's where he says, I think that's when Don Vito says he performs these miracles for strangers. That's the one thing I love about these books, Jay, is that just like with Game of Thrones, when I was reading those books, the casting that was done by HBO and the casting that was done by Paramount here was so impeccably done that I'm having such a great time hearing Brando say all this stuff. I'm hearing Robert Duvall. I'm hearing James Caan. It's working so well for me. We get to meet Luca Brasi who is a far more imposing character in the book. Yeah, he's imposing in the movie as well, but without the background you get in the book, he almost takes on a gentle giant sort of persona. And in this, we realize that he is an absolute animal, and that the only person that gives him pause and makes him a little bit nervous is Don Vito. Michael, there's another little thing here that I picked up about Michael. In the book, he seems to be the heir apparent, which is not the case in the movie. He seems to be a lot more shielded from that life in the movie. And in this, he seems like he's on the fringes, yes, but he's the one that Vito always wanted to take over, whereas in the movie, Vito wanted him to become a senator, a doctor, to be outside of this life. And that definitely would have been the life that best served Michael, because it turned him into a cold, isolated monster for the rest of his days. But all right, now we have some other parts here, and just jump in whenever. On page 32 is when we start really getting into all of the confessions, and we start getting into all of the asking of help. I love when Don Vito screams at Johnny Fontane for being weak, for being a slave to vice, or pretty much orders him to essentially detox from Hollywood for a month while they work out a solution for the movie that he wanted to do in Waltz's film. This is the reason why Sinatra hated Puzo for this, and they almost came to blows in Vegas. When Puzo was researching for all this, he was a degenerate gambler. He took all of his advance money, went to Vegas, and just played at the tables and talked to these connected guys, and that's how he built up all of the a lot of the character profiles for what he wanted to do. Sinatra, they almost came to blows at one point. And it's very, very clear that this was the Fontaine character.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that many of the main characters match up to at least maybe a conglomerate in the case of Don or Michael of various bosses. But in the case of the other figures like Johnny Fontane, it's pretty clearly this is obviously Frank Sinatra. There's a lot of parallels that show this. Both start their career off singing in a band. Both get out of that with special help. Both of them have vocal cords getting weak and becoming hemorrhaged. Both of them have their career plummets. And then both of them are put into a famous war movie that wins an award to make him a star again for Frank Sinatra. That was From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster. So, yeah, exactly. And then, by the way, the woman, obviously, that mocks him and makes fun of him when she cheats on him is obviously Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah. Yes.
The famous blonde who slept with everybody.
Yeah, and she's so she's such a bitch. I mean, so bad how the abuse that he suffers, and of course, to abandon the family and to have all that going on. Jerry in the chat room said, I had read that Johnny Fontane character was really based on Dean Martin rather than Sinatra. No, Sinatra was a raging drunk. Dean, most of his drinking was acting. You can talk to memoirs from his children and other people who worked around him. A lot of the time, it was iced tea. It was other things in that Scotch glass. That was a persona he took on. And if the other thing there too that you read, the deeper you go into this book, is that in that world of connected people, Dean Martin was almost universally loved. Sinatra, it was touch and go. There's a lot of guys that could have taken him or left him, but yeah, that's. Anyway, that's what I just want to throw out there. All right.
Well, I mean, it's got to be. I mean, unless Dean Martin slept with Marilyn Monroe, it's got to be. I mean, her name is Margot, very close to Marilyn, right?
They could have. Could have taken.
That?
They all could have had their turn. Who knows?
Well, that's true. That's true. But I think it's pretty obvious, given the fact that the idea is that if he gets this role, his career will be solidified again. He'll make a comeback. That's exactly what happened to Sinatra after From Here to Eternity, because it won Academy Award.
So
he won Best Supporting Actor for that.
Oh, Sinatra did.
Yeah. So in other words,
the
movie that it talks about putting him in the war movie to revive his career, right, in the book. Mm-hmm. And then that's actually what happened to Sinatra. He got put in the war movie From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster, and that got him a Best Supporting Actor Oscar.
It's the parallels are very, very they line up perfectly, which is why there was almost problems for Puzo, but they got worked out eventually. There was at least one big confrontation I knew of, but here's the other thing: Genco Abbandondo. We hear a little bit about him, the consigliere, from whom the name Genco Olive Oil came. That was a really powerful scene in the hospital as he's dying, asking Don Vito to help see him through to the end, so that perhaps he would scare even death away. You can, yeah.
There's a couple things I wanted. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but there's a couple things that were earlier on. We had the mention of the importance of bloodline, because it's stressed that Tom, the replacement consigliere, is not Sicilian, and this was a deviation on the part of Don Vito from the tradition. And in that, we see that you can't be a quote half-breed; you have to be full Sicilian. And so there's a respect for and an appreciation for, and perhaps even a quasi-religious significance for bloodlines. Mm-hmm. And that's not unique to the Sicilian tradition here. That is pretty universal in the ancient world, with the bloodlines of the gods, right? The idea that those who rule have a superior genetics. So way before DNA, genetics, and epigenetics, you had the ancient world, Europe, right? Medieval Europe has this intense interest in bloodlines and who you marry and who you don't marry. So the Don is very old world in that way, that he's very concerned with who marries who and what happens, because he's ruling an empire. And it's almost like it's a dynasty, right? It's a royal dynasty that he's going to have to choose who will step up to the plate. Like you said, it's different in the book than it is in the movie, but I think that was all I had for that. Go ahead.
No, okay. Yeah, and you're going to see a lot more of that come to the fore, not only just who is going to be the heir to everything that Don Vito had built, along with people like Genco and to a large degree Clemenza and Tessio. They all came up together, but obviously the Don is he was the head and shoulders above the rest. You're going to see a lot of that really come to the fore when they have to start deciding what is going to be done with the business propositions coming from Virgil Sollozzo, and so that's coming up next. Now, as far as the death scene with Genco, there is an act. I would say that you can find this deleted scene on YouTube. There's actually an entire hour-long compilation of deleted scenes that are really incredible. But that's another one in there that was in the movie at one point, got taken out. But Tom Hagen, the German-Irish consigliere, who's going out to California now, and he's going to try to work out this thing with Johnny's role with Waltz, and then he meets Khartoum, the prized stud horse. Also, you see Waltz's penchant for very, very underage girls. And the Hollywood,
he's a PEDO, exactly.
And the Hollywood moms who are willing to pimp them out too, just cold. And it's crazy. On page 55, there's more on the themes of self-control that are going on. That's another thing here about sacred masculine, heroic masculinity all throughout of this. In page 55, for the first time, Walt succeeded in astounding Hagen. Okay, this is where Walt reveals that he really wants to just ruin Johnny because he stole a female protege, of which he's had thousands over a career, and the pettiness really got to Tom. He found it inconceivable that a grown man of substance would let such trivialities affect his judgment in an affair of business and of one such importance. In Hagen's world, the Corleone's world, the physical beauty, the sexual power of women carried not the slightest weight in worldly matters. Now tell me that that is not the complete inverse in 2023. That leads everything around. That is the greatest carrot on every stick around us these days. It's probably why we're so out of our minds.
Well, I mean, Don Corleone himself mocks this feminism when he is making fun of Johnny Fontaine, because when Johnny Fontaine comes to Don Corleone to ask for the help to get this role that he needs to revive his career, and he cries about presumably Marilyn Monroe cheating on him, Don Corleone makes fun of him. Oh, why can't you do this? And then he slaps him, if you remember in the movie.
Yeah,
right?
I love it.
Act like a man. Why can't you act like a man? And then in the novel, he says, women were not made to understand and figure out this world, right? It's up to men to rule this world. And it's a burden that we bear. And that's why you have people like me, because this world is very difficult. So you need people like the Godfather, because he has this line. He says that, friendship is almost the equal of family, and people like me exist to help you out, because he says Godfathers exist because one father is not enough in this tough world. So you need two fathers. So your church father, your human father is going to be limited. Again, when you're at your end of your rope, you got to turn to Don Vito to get justice, to get favors, to get whatever it is you're in desperate straits to get. But yeah, it's totally anti-feminist. I mean, this is obviously, he's old world. Even when he's giving counsel to Johnny Fontaine, he says, why can't you just go back to your wife, and then if you have girlfriends, have your girlfriends? And Johnny Fontaine says it's not like that anymore, right? The women today, they're not like the old Italian wives. They don't put up with that. And so Don Corleone is just like, well, you're letting women run your life. You're not a man, right? So all of that is, I think, very anti-feminist. And it's also curious too, because Don Corleone is not pro-prostitution. It's the Tattaglia family that's the rival family that was running the prostitution ring. And that's part of the reason that he gets suspicious that they might be making moves against him when he turns down the offer to run drugs, right?
Yep.
So again, a lot of really interesting chess moves, and optics is another thing I took a lot of notes of. Like, you can tell again the Machiavellian ideas of projecting and maintaining power relations. For example, Don Corleone is very wise when it comes to these relations, and he's always trying to put Sonny's rashness in check, and he doesn't want to make a false chess move, when it comes to the director, or when it comes to any of these other characters that he's dealing with, the hoodlums that need to get beat up. Everything has to be done in just the right, perfect timing and in the right optics way. Again, which is all very real, if you read books like actual history of the mafia.
Yeah, infamita. That's what what he uses the word that term gets thrown around a lot. A horrendous act, especially against family, children, even drug use. It's a very big thing about standards and protocol and etiquette. And as far as the psychological thing, I think when you bring that up, the first thing I think about was on page 59. It's the beginning of chapter 2. It's regarding Waltz. Now Hagen's back home. They're trying to get ready for this meeting with Virgil Sollozzo, but then the Don asks Hagen, "Does this man have real balls? I love that question. Does this man have real balls? And then the next paragraph here. Hagen considered what the Don meant by this question. Over the years, he had learned that the Don's values were so different from those of most people that his words almost could have different meaning. Did Waltz have character? Did he have a strong will? He most certainly did, but he was not what the Don was asking. Did the movie producer have the courage not to be bluffed? Did he have the willingness to suffer heavy financial loss delay on his movies would mean, or the scandal of his big star exposed for user or heroin? The answer was yes, but again, this was not what the Don meant. Finally, Hagen translated the question properly in his mind. Did Jack Waltz have the balls to risk everything, to run the chance of losing all on a matter of principle, on a matter of honor, for revenge? And Hagen smiled and he said, no, he doesn't have balls, and that's when the horse's head went in the bed. And I love that. Is just something that makes just the opening salvo of this book just so awesome. It's the psychology, it's the Machiavellianism, it's just everything. I love that right there. And then Waltz gets the horse's head on page 62. Really unbelievable.
He also shows the same kind of measured chess move patience when it comes to the mistake that Sonny makes when the Turk comes to offer the drug deal, and when the money is mentioned, Sonny just blurts out, that's a lot of money. We should do this, right? And then that reveals that Sonny, then, who is the heir apparent, is divided against the decisions of, the Don.
Yeah,
and that fissure could then be exploited, as the novel points out. So there's a lot of really profound human psychology here, and again, power dynamics and projecting power, maintaining power, and so forth. I don't know if you've seen that. It was kind of a popular book 10 years ago. I think it's Robert Greene, Laws of Power book.
No.
You know what I'm talking about? It was a really popular book. I think Jordan Peterson had that guy on recently, and it's a lot of what we're reading is in that book, and he just kind of collates a bunch of historical examples of. It's very similar to Machiavelli and the Prince and all that. But let me show you what I'm talking about.
Okay. Yeah. What Jay was talking about. We're going to get to that the Salazzo meeting just coming up next. But yeah, Sonny screws Vito. We'll talk about that in just a second.
It's called The Laws of Power. It was a really popular kind of New York Times bestseller sort of thing. But a lot of what's in here reminds me of the way Don Corleone is acting throughout the novel, where he's always concerned with, for example, law number 1, never outshine the master, right? So underlings, under bosses, it's not in your best interest to, outshine the Don. Law number 2, trust your friends, but don't overtrust your friends, and learn how to use your enemies. That's very much a Don Corleone approach. Law number 3, conceal your intentions. That's the very thing that the Don tells Sonny. He says, don't tell anybody outside the family what our plans are. Much better to have them guessing than to have them knowing. So, very, very similar to Laws of Power.
That's huge. That's that's it right there. That's that meeting. Well, let's do this real quick, and then we'll get to that meeting because that's huge. But as far as Waltz, when he gets the horse's head in the bed, which is such a, that's how most people identify the Godfather. You think of the horse's head. I love this part right here, the underestimating Vito. 62. Waltz was not a stupid man. He was merely a supremely egotistical one. He had mistaken the power that he wielded in his world to be more potent than the power of Don Corleone's. He had merely needed some proof that this was not true. He understood the message that despite all of his wealth, despite all of his contacts with the President of the United States, despite all of his claims of friendship with the director of the FBI, an obscure importer of Italian olive oil would have him killed. That is,
did you notice the connection too, that it mentions that the Hollywood people are connected to the Pentagon, and it even咗that Waltz is a filmer of propaganda for the government.
Yep.
So he films. So there's a connection between J. Edgar Hoover, Pentagon, Hollywood, but the organized crime is also connected as well, because if you notice, it pointed out that Tom had a gift from one of the higher ups at the Pentagon as well.
Yeah, and they have senators, they have judges. But But that's just one of those things where you wonder, hey, maybe it all held each other in balance. It all held each other in check at one point. Now there's only one real gang on the scene.
Right.
But
let me read real quick what it says. Jack Woltz was one of the 3 most important producers in Hollywood. He was the owner of his own studio, and he had dozens of stars under contract. He was on the president of the United States Advisory Council for War Information, the cinematic division, which meant simply that he made propaganda movies.
Yeah.
So here you have Puzo telling us, and by the way, he's also a Hollywood elite PEDO. So here you have right now everything that we are learning about and figuring out in 2020, 2023 was in this 1969 classic novel.
And the storytelling stretches back to the late 40s. I mean, we're talking about Michael.
Right.
Michael goes to the wedding dressed in his Marine fatigues. So that's we haven't even gotten into the 50s yet. So
does it say what year? I didn't even catch it. What year is it supposed to be? Like the wedding? Do we know what year that is?
I don't know if that slips at all. I think I'm just going by what I have internalized from all the years of watching the movies. But I think that this is shortly after the war. So that's
okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's shortly after.
Yeah, because it calls him a war hero, exactly.
Yeah, and part 2, which I think is actually combined into this book. I think that a lot of what's in part 2, right. That is mainly in the 50s. So, all right. So now the big thing is the Sollozzo meeting, and as you said right there, it's a meeting about heroin. It's a meeting about wanting and needing the Don's political protection, which would evaporate if everybody started knew that he was dealing in heroin and not gambling. And then Sonny screws Vito by opening up his mouth and showing Sollozzo that he is hot for the deal. When Sollozzo says that Vito's $2 million investment would be guaranteed by the Tattaglia family, that made Sonny blurt out, "You're telling me that the Tattaglias are going to guarantee our entire investment?" And Vito shoots him a look, apologizes for the youth of today who doesn't know to shut up, but too much has already been said. Sollozzo knows that even though he's being rejected by Vito, if he now shoots, kills, eliminates Vito with the support of the Tattaglia family behind him, he will have somebody to negotiate with in the Corleone family, because Sonny, who is the up-and-coming Don that everybody assumes, is really looking to get into the heroin business. So that's when we have the setup of Vito getting shot 3 months later. Paulie Gatto is not around, which is interesting because you don't get too much of him in the movie, to the point where I thought that Paulie was just a guy that in the movie that Sonny just pulled the trigger on just for the hell of it. But in the book, it seems like Paulie really was. You get a little bit more of him as an up-and-coming mafioso character, and maybe he really was on the setup, working with the setup to have Vito assassinated. So there's that. What do you think about all that?
Well, hold on, because I just remembered something else I wanted to mention. I don't mean to change the subject, but I forgot that I wanted to mention that when he was at the casket of the guy dying with cancer, the previous consigliere, right? He was the previous consigliere that was dying with cancer. Is that right?
Jenko, yeah.
Yeah. When he was at the casket, this is a really important part for the Don's sort of God the Father type character. They have this discussion where he says, "Stay with me, let me confess to you." And he says, "My sins are great." And then he says, "Well, I'll have a bunch of masses said for you." And he says, "I will intercede." And so even on his deathbed, he's, basically asking the Don to grant him favors for the afterlife.
I know.
And then he says, you even have the ability to turn off or to ward off the Grim Reaper when he shows up. So can you ward him off, Don Corleone? He says, you and he are in a covenant. You guys were in he says you're bound together with him. So the Don is not just a grantor of favors. He's also divine justice. He's the Don of death. And there's many places where he's equated both to life and to death. There's the power of life and death as the Godfather. That was a really important, powerful image there with that guy begging him to save him in the afterlife. And then the line, I'm sorry, I got distracted from because I was looking for that quote. What were you saying about Tom? I got distracted.
Tom. Well, Tom is after.
I'm sorry, you were talking about Sonny. Excuse me.
Sorry. Well, just Sonny really selling. Well, not selling Vito out, but screwing him by showing that he was hot for the deal instead of just being. If Sollozzo saw that there was a unified front at that meeting right there, they might have to think twice about how they're going to approach to really muscle the Corleones into doing what they wanted, because they didn't have the muscle. They didn't have the muscle at the time to take them on, but if they cut off the head, then they think that there might be something underneath that they can work with. But
yeah, exactly. This is kind of inadvertently Sonny's fault.
Yes.
I mean, that this wouldn't have happened probably, or you could argue, like you're saying, had not Sonny blurted out the greedy intentions. And that's why Vito immediately says, this younger generation's too greedy.
Yeah.
No respect. No, they don't have any respect. They blurt out. They don't let the elders. So again, we have this going away from the older traditions, right? You shouldn't be speaking out like this in the presence of your elders. You need to have respect. All of the older generation people have immense amounts of respect. And that's why they were called the men of respect in Sicily, right? The Dons were called the men of respect. And even when Don Corleone's picking out his fruit, he doesn't pick his fruit. He points at it. Mm-hmm. It makes a point to say that because it's a sign of disrespect if you're the, fruit man and you the fruit cart guy and you didn't pick up the fruit for the Don. So Sonny represents this younger, greedy, ruled by their passions generation that doesn't have the ability to stop and to think wisely. And like you said, from the very get-go, we saw that he can't control himself. Not only can he not control himself in terms of his temper, but also because he sleeps with, somebody else's wife at the wedding. He's cheating on his wife.
Cheating on his wife with the maid of honor for his sister. His sister's
so no self-control.
Right, none. And and that brings us to, well, obviously Tom. There's that famous, Tom was kidnapped and all of that. Really, really high intensity scenes with him and Sollozzo. Obviously, there's also the looming question of where Luca Brasi is. Of course, we know that if he hasn't been heard from in so long and he hasn't heard the news, man, something must be wrong. And that is really at the end of where we are at the last of chapter 4. It's going to get really, really hot now. Now, before we get into where we're going to read next, I want to get into the thread. There's only a couple of things that have been put here, so we should be able to get through this in no time, and then we can wrap up for the session 1, because session 2 is going to be sick. This is from The Ghost of Daniel Parker. It says, what stands out to me after reading the first couple of chapters of The Godfather is the focus on sex. Perhaps a more precise term would be fertility. It's the job of the patriarch to regulate the sexual activities of his family to ensure responsible reproduction. The most obvious means a father has to accomplish this is to have his children, especially his daughters, marry. In the very first chapter, the main scene is the marriage of Don Corleone's daughter. At the wedding, the baker requests that Don helps his daughter's Italian boyfriend become an American citizen so they can marry. The father had earlier expressed to his wife a concern that his daughter is going to get pregnant out of wedlock. In the case of the undertaker, he is angry because the two young men attacked his daughter and permanently disfigured her, thus making her less attractive to potential husbands. The men are barely punished for this great crime committed against his family, and he goes to the Don for justice. To be in control of his family's sexual activities, the patriarch himself, most of all, must be in control of his sexual urges. Puzo establishes that Don Corleone is such a man. When Johnny Fontaine is entertaining guests at the wedding with the singing of love songs, the Don is not interested, unlike his wife. Later, Tom Hagen attempts to hide that the Turk is involved in prostitution. Puzo once again writes that the Don is notoriously straight-laced in the matters of sex. The complete opposite of the Don is Johnny Fontaine, who is a sexual libertine. Fontaine is sexually obsessed with his whorish Hollywood wife. He has left his first wife and children for her. To the Godfather, Johnny is a fool. Here's the quote, "You lived like a fool, and you have come to a fool's end." He tells Johnny to be a man, which means to be a responsible father. A man who is not a father to his children can never be a real man. And then not quite as sexually debauched as Johnny, but nevertheless a man who is completely in control of his passions as the Don's eldest son, Sonny. Sonny is most known for his hot temper and his massive, huge sexual organ. It is established early in the novel that he does not possess the self-control necessary to succeed his father, which is something. Which is really something that because in the movie you just assume that if Sonny lives, he's going to be the Don, and but anyway, yes, I have some other thoughts, but I'll leave it to that for now. Thanks for reading Ghosts of Daniel Parker. Really great stuff.
Can I add something to that?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that's important there, that goes back to the bloodline stuff, because how you pass off your sons and daughters is going to be very important for making those alliances for the children that will be produced, the future generations that will run this dynasty, this empire. So again, the Don is a very old world figure who understands that power and the need to regulate and have self-control, because he's older, he's wiser, he's that older generation. And the younger generations, again, don't have that, except that it looks like Michael might have that.
Yes.
We don't know that yet, but obviously we know he's going to be the heir apparent. And I wanted to say, too, that the Tatalia offer of joining in with the heroin trade is also historically accurate. That was actually aligned with the intelligence agencies going to the organized crime networks, particularly the CIA and the OSS through Paul Hellyer. Paul Hellowell came up with the idea that's detailed in the Gladio book to reach out to organized crime to be the funding mechanism for a lot of the black ops, and particularly Gladio, which would utilize the Vatican Bank, hence the necessity of reaching out to a lot of these organized crime figures. So Gladio plays a key role in this. It was funded by that heroin trade, and the intelligence agencies needed the organized crime figures to help run that trade. So it's not just, the novel doesn't go into this, but we later find out in terms of geopolitical histories that are written about it. It's not just that organized crime is getting turned down by the Don. It's significant that it's the establishment, it's the Pentagon and the Navy even, and the OSS and the CIA that want the families involved in this to help patriotism further, right? They play on the patriotism here, ironically, in the real world, right, in the Gladio operation, to fund their operations. And this ends up ironically being a stepping stone to a lot of the organized crime eventually having a downfall. Yeah. Even though they don't know that at this time, but eventually by the time of Gotti and other figures, right, that's where we start to see the downfall. Yeah,
and then that is that downfall and the major rising up, aside from Prohibition era, but also all throughout World War II. If it weren't for Luciano and other figures, I mean, Sicily became a major staging ground for Allied forces.
Exactly.
Retaking it, and that was all with the assistance of La Cosa Nostra. So that it's incredible. So there's a lot of early.
You know about Operation Underworld, right?
Operation? No, not the details of it. No.
Yeah, that's this basically.
That's what it is.
Navy and the deep state basically making alliances with organized crime in the U.S. So,
it's that.
Huh?
Yeah, and that's overseas. Do they include even the work that was done over here in like New York Harbor, the shipyards? Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's
part of Underworld. Also, another key figure that will be coded is the figure of Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky plays a key role with Lucky Luciano in organizing the families together. That I think had just occurred prior to where the narrative in the book is. So the 5 families has already been organized, because that's mentioned as, that there might be a war between the Corleones, and Sonny says, "I'll go to war with all the 5 families."
Yeah.
So that had just recently kind of been organized, I think, in the 30s or 40s, I think, with Meyer and Lucky Luciano setting that all up in maybe it was 1931. I forget the exact year. But.
And Meyer Lansky is probably that's probably the who becomes Hyman Roth in
in the book he's Hyman Roth.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, over here on Robert Solorio on the thread, there's only two more things here. He says, has anyone ever wrote a list of Don Corleone's wisdom? And he put together a whole bunch of wonderful quotes. I'm glad that he did this, and I hope throughout the book somebody else does this as well. Just quotes. Page 19, when a man was generous, he must show the generosity as personal. Page 26, you never armed yourself with true friends. Page 31, you can start by acting like a man. Page 32, you live like a fool and have come to a fool's end. Here's another one. A man who is not a father to his children can never be a real man. Page 33, you let women dictate your actions and they are not competent in this world. Another one, friendship is everything, more than talent, more than government, almost the equal of family. Page 46, a lawyer with a briefcase can steal more than 100 men with guns. Oh, don't we know? Page 50, never get angry, never make a threat, reason with people. Also, a glossary for us non-Italians, finocchio means homosexual. That's why he says, this is how you turn out a Hollywood finocchio who cries like a woman. Infamita, that is a heinous act against the family. Yeah. So, so there's some really great quotes there.
I'm wrong. It's 1946. Lucky Luciano hosts the Havana Conference, and that's where the families are all organized in the reorganization scheme of Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky.
There you have Havana, Cuba, big, and in probably at the end of this book, if we'll
part
see.
2. Yep.
Yeah, we'll get in there.
Yep.
Let's see here. NJSF. This is the last one we have here. It says, I appreciate the initial setup for the request of the wedding day. It gave depth to the conversation with the Don, both what was at stake for the requesters and the insight of the Don, from the court scene to Johnny Fontaine waiting for his wife. Friendship, loyalty, honor, righteousness are clearly on display as fundamental values. And the scene where that is clearest is at the deathbed of consigliere Genco Abondando. And before that exchange with the doctor, with the Don, diffuses the doctor's arrogance. One of the daughters asked timidly, Dr. Kennedy, can we go see him now? Dr. Kennedy looked over to the large group with exasperation. Didn't these people realize that the man inside was dying and dying in torturous pain? It would be much better if everyone left him to die in peace. And then, of course, he says, my dear doctor, said Don Corleone, is it true he's dying? Yes. Yes, said Dr. Kennedy. Then there's nothing more for you to do, said Don Corleone. We'll take up the burden. We will comfort him. We will close his eyes. We will bury him and weep at his funeral. And afterwards, we will watch over his wife and daughters. At hearing this put so bluntly, forcing her to understand, Mrs. Abondando began to weep. Dr. Kennedy shrugged. It was impossible to explain to these peasants. At the same time, he recognized the crude justice in the man's remarks. His role was over. So it's things like that. There is something to the use of language here in reasoning with people. I think that, I believe the Italian word for reasoning, they say, means to rejoin. And it's an interesting thing, I guess, to rejoin reality. What is that? When you're being unreasonable, you're kind of just drifting away. And I like how quiet and peaceful he is with his logic, and that it diffuses a lot. And like we said before, if all three of his sons could be combined into one person, then he'd have a really good heir to pass the family business along to. But he's only one person, and obviously no one like him, the Don.
So Vito Genovese worked with the Navy and the Army. He was actually the chief translator for the U.S. Army headquarters in Naples, and he assisted allies in their efforts. Thanks to the media success of the invasion, Lucky Luciano actually became the subject of massive media hype, which culminated in radio broadcaster Walter Winchell proclaiming Lucky should receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, in 1946, Lucky Luciano arrived in his hometown of Sicily, where he received a hero's welcome. And then it says half of the people that I met in Sicily were in the mafia, Lucky later commented. And by half the people, I mean half of the cops too. In Sicily, it goes like this: mafia's first, then family, then your business, and then the mafia again. In October, the request of U.S. intelligence agents led to Lucky traveling to Cuba, where he met with Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia, and Meyer Lansky to discuss the Hallowell Plan, which was the OSS plan to sell drugs to fund anti-communist operations, aka Gladio. Just a couple more points here. It says present were people like Mike Miranda, Joseph Magliocco, Joe Adonis, Tommy Lucchese, Joe Profaci, Willie Moretti, Fischetti brothers, the heirs to the Al Capone outfit, and Santo Trafficante, all important members at that time of the American Mafia. The conference was held at the Hotel Nacional, where Frank Sinatra made his Havana singing debut in honor of Lucky Luciano. And then it talks about how they made the decision that they would sell the narcotics to certain groups. This became known as Operation X. And then while Bill Donovan steps in to play a key role after Hellawell sets it up. So that's really important to the chapter that we just read and ended there with the character of the Turk offering that offer, because again, all this is like straight out of what was actually going on in history. And that Hotel Nacional meeting is what is parodied in the movie when they go to Havana, and it's right before the revolution. And in Godfather 2, if you remember, right, they're having that discussion between, and even says United Fruit Company, that means CIA. That was the cutouts front company. So the CIA, the OSS, they're there with Meyer Lansky, they're there with these corporations and with the mobsters. And Michael is there in the movie in part 2 to make sure to figure out what cut they're going to get. And so we begin to see a change in the structure, right, in Godfather 2 with Michael. But the book, I don't think the book is going to go in that direction, right?
I don't know. I this is the first time I'm reading through it.
Okay.
But what I have read that the source material for what would become part 1 and part 2 were from the Godfather, the first book. Yeah. So I'm assuming that we're going to get that. And I love that line in Godfather 2 when he's out there in Havana and he's with Hyman Roth, and he was talking about the revolutionaries he saw on the streets. That was, he said, I saw somebody, I saw somebody confront the police, and instead of giving himself up, he blew himself up with a grenade. And Hyman Roth is just like, well, what's the problem? There's always problems like that. He goes, what's the problem? And he said, well, it occurs to me that when people are willing to do that for a cause, that they can win. And of course, New Year's Day, I think it's 1958, 1959, all of a sudden, the revolution is complete. And from there, we're talking about embargoes, we're talking about a lot of things there. And it's, the Havana was going to be the next Las Vegas, as you know.
Yeah, they were going to make it like Miami and make it this like a vacation resort destination. Everybody was going to profit from it. The real meeting of the Hotel Nacional was about drugs and also that stuff too. But I don't know if they mentioned drugs in the movie. I can't remember.
I don't know either. I really don't know. And I think that's the end of this over here. Oh, here one last thing from NJSF says, one example of the talent of Puzo composing the scenes to me was when Sonny went to his father's house after the gun down. You need nothing more than the last statement to put yourself at that home. Ma, where are you? And his mother came out of the kitchen. Behind her rose the smell of frying peppers. I know that smell. I love that smell. I love being stained by that smell. And that put me at ease as well. The fact that he made himself a sandwich right off the bat, and so I can just sop up some of that oil with some good bread. Oh man, it's good. Now I would say I breezed through these pages. So what I'm thinking is, let's go from chapter 5 all the way to the beginning of book 3. So for me, it's page 89 to page 180. I want to do like 90 something pages because hell yeah, I don't want to.
So just another 100 pages.
Yeah. Let's just go from chapter 5 to the very end of book 2. You're looking at the page of book 3. That's where we stop.
Yeah, it's basically 100 pages for me.
Okay. All right. Okay, so then listen. I'll be looking into the thread. Everybody, let me go into the chat room real quick. Top trip triangle. Muslim. Well, anyway, did everybody in the chat room like it? Go ahead. How'd you like it so far? I'm excited for the second round. Jay, if there isn't anything else, then we will convene this this session, and we will.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize that you were giving me the link for the video for the subscribers. Next time I'll send this out to all my subscribers, and then they can come to the live chat as well. I didn't even think about that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's it's exclusive, so I want you to be able to do that for your supporters as well, so we can combine.
Well, a lot of them will want to come to the live chat. I mean, I gave, like, Brave New World, they got access to all the parts, but they'd like to be in your live chat too, I imagine. So
absolutely.
I'll send them a link next time.
That'd be great. All right, man. Well, a lot of people, awesome, like it so far. So good, very good, so freaking good. Liked it very much. Great. Then read to the beginning of book 3, and in the meantime, you can email me, quitefranklypodcast@gmail.com. Jay will be stopping by as usual, and session 2 will be next Monday at 8:30 p.m. Jay, thanks for everything, man.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good night.
You too. You too.
All right, ladies and gents. Again, thank you so much, and we'll be on our way. We'll be on our way. Who knows where it all goes, but it's gonna be fun. Night. See you soon.